Hi guys, welcome back. My name is Jaspreet and today I'm back with a video where I show you how I use lace and doily for texturing clay. Now there are two different ways I use lace and doilies for texturing clay. One is the more obvious one where you press the texture, the lace or the doily in clay and capture the texture. The other is slightly different in the sense there's an additional step involved there, but it's completely worth the outcome. I really enjoy what the final product looks like. It is the same texture, but it is different in terms of how it looks and feels. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Also, I'll show you different kinds of laces and doilies that I use in my work. I'll show you a few samples of the things I've made with those textures, and then we'll get on to making something with a slightly different technique. So that's what I have planned for you today. Let's get started. All right, let's start with some examples of different kinds of laces and doilies that you can use with clay. Now I have a small part of my collection here just to show you the different kinds of doilies and laces that are available. Now one is this, which is like a proper doily. These are actually table covers, I think, and they do give a really nice deep impression in clay. I mean, these are just some of my recent discoveries. Okay, so there are these kind of doilies. Now here's another kind of lace or doily. I'm not sure what they're called, but in this case the thread or the weave is not as thick as for these ones, but they still do a good job with adding texture to the clay. So these work well with plates and stuff. Okay, you might hear some airplanes in the background. There's some drill happening for the National Day, so my apologies for the noise. Here's another example. This one I think I picked up from Germany, I think, from a flea market in Germany. Right, here's another one. Again, they're all similar in the sense that they are like doily. They're all, I think, machine made. I don't think these are handmade or anything. These are all machine made, and I bought all of these online. I'll try and link everything I can on in the description. Most of them you can find on either Amazon. Some you may be able to find even on Shein. Maybe Temu may have some. I'm not sure what it's called. We don't have Temu here in Singapore, but I know my friends over in US have talked about it, so probably you'll have access to these kind of things on that app. So this is another sort which is similar to the doily, but I think the designs are a little bit more intricate and refined. But the thread or the weave is not as thick as these, but they still work perfectly fine. All right. Then there are these, border laces or whatever they're called. You can use these. I've used a lot of these in, I think, mugs and stuff. Here's another one. Right. So these you can find in so many different patterns, and they do a great job of texturing clay. Here's one of my favorites, absolute favorites. Now, the one thing you have to remember when you're using these lace and doily textures is that usually, especially something like this, which is embroidered on a net, you will see that one side is kind of dull and then the other side is more raised. The pattern is raised. This is the side that should go in the clay, face down in the clay, to get a nice impression. If you press it with the dull side facing the clay, you might not get a deep impression. So that's one thing you should remember. So this is another one. This is like my absolute favorite. And then again, in the same line as with the nets, like some kind of embroidered pattern on net. Now these also, again, the weave is thinner, the thread is thinner, but you can get a good impression. The only issue with these is that this fine, very fine net texture also gets transferred onto the clay. Now some people don't mind it. I personally do not like it. So what I'll usually do is that I will actually go, once I have put in the texture, I'll just spend a couple of minutes just cleaning off the finer neck texture, unwanted texture with my hand, just a damp finger, and just go over the clay surface like this, getting rid of all of this net texture. Again, it's a personal preference, and honestly, if you're using a plain glaze, like just a glaze, it may not show, but if you are using an underglaze to add some depth, then you might be able to see this annoying net texture. Let me see, I have one example of the texture showing through, and the piece was a disaster, but I have it, somewhere I can show you. And here's a large platter, and this actually warped, like this side completely warped, and I know what happened here. But anyways, let me just show you. So if you see here, I wasn't able to get rid of the net texture. Okay, so some of it has transferred because I've used an underglaze and then wiped back. That underglaze has stayed back in, these certain areas. Now, if you don't mind that, if you like that vintagey look, that, worn out look, it's up to you. That's perfectly all right. But I can see these in all of these areas, and I don't particularly like it. Now, if I'm using just a simple glaze, like if I'm using just the glaze, then you won't have this problem. Then you won't really notice this fine texture. But if you're using some kind of underglaze first and then wiping back, and I've just added clear on top, and I can see all of this texture, and I do not really, and you can see how badly that's warped. That's actually two different clays mixed together, and it obviously overfired. It was beautiful. I might try it again, but yeah. So that's an example where the neck texture can transfer. All right. So here's an example again. I use these to make platters. Just cut out the size, the clay exactly in the shape of the doily, and go ahead with those. Here's one with square shape, in the square shape, and again the texture is really deep. You can see it's kind of raised. That works. And here's another one again with raised texture, and this is a dull texture. So you just have to keep these things in mind. And here are a few other little pieces I have. This little butterfly, some teapots. You can use this on a little plate or a tea bag holder. I have a mask as well. Again, I think it's a thick thread or weave, and I think I'll get a good impression in clay. I haven't used these yet, but these are just some different kinds of lace options, doily options that you have that you can use for texturing your clay. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about, one is the obvious way where you just place this with the deeper side, with the prominent thread side face down in clay, and press over with a pony roller or a brayer, and you get the texture in clay. But there's another way of using these, and I'll just talk about it in a second. Let me just get these out of the way. Let me just show you some examples of these doilies in clay. So this is my moon vase, and you can see it's a round doily. Just put in clay. Looks great. Here's another one. This is, I think, holly green. I have thinned it down quite a bit, but there you have it. This is another one with turquoise blue underglaze from Speedball with clear on top. I think it looks great. And this is my favorite, obviously. Oopsie. This is blue and white. And again with a doily texture. I think it looks really good. So with clear on top. So just some ideas of how you can use these for texture. I have made mugs as well. I just don't happen to have any in the studio right now. Now, one way to use these doilies or lace is to just, take a slab, place this with a prominent texture side facing down, and go over with a pony roller and go over the entire surface and peel it off, and you can get your impression in clay, just like you do with, placemats that we did recently. Now, with that, what happens is that you get a debossed surface. Now, if you see, this is a debossed surface where there is an indent, a depression in clay where the texture is, all right, as opposed to a rolling pin. For example, this is again a bisque piece. When you use a rolling pin, the surface that you see here, the texture that you see, this is embossed, it's raised. The surface is raised, the texture is raised. When it's let me show you bisque where. When it is a doily or a lace, the surface is actually debossed. There's a depression, there is a indent in the clay which gives it this texture, right? This is one way you can use, and the normal way that most people use, and I also use it mostly this way. But then what I did was, now while this is great and you can use these, you can use it just with glaze directly, and you'll get a nice variation in glaze where you'll be able to see the texture, or you can use it with underglazes as I've used it here. Another way of using, which I personally like, is making texture plates with these doily textures. For example, let me just show you some examples here. So I've taken this doily and made it into a texture plate here. It's a flat surface. Again, I just place this on the clay, right? I pressed the texture in clay with a pony roller, let it dry, made sure it was drying flat, and then bisque fired it. And now I have a texture plate made out of the same doily. Now, when I use this texture plate to add texture to my clay, I will get a raised surface and embossed surface instead of a debossed surface. I hope I'm explaining what I'm saying. I'll just show you a few examples and then we'll actually do what I'm talking about. I'll show you how I use these plates, but I've made a few here with the doilies. Again, this is all debossed, and I'm going to use this texture plate to texture another piece of clay and get an embossed texture. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second, but I'm just showing you some examples of how I've used these. Maybe I do have an example of some other pieces and I'll just quickly get to them. So for example, I had an embroidered shirt to create this texture plate, right? Now, if I put this in clay, it will again be that depressed, debossed texture. But I use this texture to make a mug. Now, if you see, the texture is raised, it is embossed, it's not debossed, right? That is the difference I'm talking about. Here, the texture is depressed, here, the texture is raised. And that's a look I like better. With these, I'll show you an example where it's all done. So here's another one of these designs. Again, I had an embroidered piece of, clothing, and I put that in clay, and I use that to make this. Can you see that? This is the embossed look of that texture plate here. I think it's beautiful. While this will also look great, I just like this better because you can actually see the thread work and feel the thread work, and it's just, you can literally see these dotted thread work here, which is just so amazing. I love that. Yeah, so this is the look that I really like, the embossed look. It looks like the piece of ceramic has been embroidered on. And that's what is so fantastic about this. So we'll be using one of the texture plates here and make something with it. So I'll show you a few more textures that I have from my clothes that I've made into little texture plates. Now these are really thin and I'm careful when I'm using them, but the new ones that I made, these are all nice and thick. So make sure that you use thick slabs of clay. I use mostly recycled clay. Here's another one, right? You can see these are beautiful textures and they give great impressions. So this is one step extra, but the thing is, once you make a texture plate and you store it carefully, you don't have to worry about it again. So I'm just going to move these off to the side, and then we'll bring in our slab and maybe I'll make this one because I have one which is made with a depressed texture. Now we'll make one which will have an embossed texture, and we'll see how different they look. So let me just put these out of the way. So here's my clay slab, and I'm going to quickly just compress it. This is rolled to 1/4 of an inch thickness. This is a nice smooth clay body without any grog. Then you flip it and do the same thing on this side as well. Now, whenever I'm using something like a bisque texture plate to add texture, I prefer to add the clay on top of the texture so that I can press on the clay and get the impression on the clay rather than placing this on top and trying to press it. It's easier to press the clay and get the impression. I'm first going to move this onto another board and then come back to it in a second. All right, so I've just taken a different workboard, place my texture plate on top. Now I'm going to place my slab on top of this texture plate, making sure it's entirely covered. Okay, yeah, I think that should do it. Now with my pony roller, I'm going to start rolling it. It helps if your texture plate is thick and is not warped. So make sure that when you are making and drying your plates, it is weighed down. So I'm first making sure I'm just slightly going over the entire surface just to mark out the edges of the texture plate underneath. So first I start with this side, which is nice and flat, and this side has a little bit of a curve. I'm going to use this side to start pressing in the texture. I'm going to go one by one in all the different areas, and I'm trying to press it in the outward direction just to avoid any kind of air bubbles in the center. And when you do this, your clay may stretch out a little bit, and it's all right. So if you want, you can start with a slightly thicker slab and then do this. So I am spending a couple of minutes here, my time, making sure that I get a nice deep impression. But I'm not pressing hard. I'm just going over the surface multiple times, but not pressing hard at all because I don't want to break my texture plates. I'm careful about that. So that is done. Now, one last thing I like to do is just go in and press with my fingers, okay, with my hands, just a little bit, because there's only one chance that you can, you know, release this, remove the texture plate. Once you do that, you can't really place it back up and get the texture. Yes, there are easier ways to get texture, just roll it or rolling pin, that's the easiest one. But again, it depends how far you want to go, in your quest for texture. I love my textured pieces and especially love these embossed textures. And this is something I've always missed with the lace. While the lace patterns are beautiful, I've always wished I could have like an embossed pattern instead of a debossed surface. And I finally figured I can do it. I mean, I started with mugs with those, long texture plates that I just showed you. I started with those because I wanted to get the look of that embroidered cloth look on my ceramic pieces. And that's how then I got into, making more of these texture plates. Okay, I think we're good. Now, if you want, you can cut out these sides. I'm going to let it be and just place another board on top, making sure it's all covered. Okay, and then lift and flip. Okay, you'll know now if it worked. So I'm going to just pull this out. Oh, can you see that texture? Oh, that's great. Okay, I know it's not deep, but it's a nice impression. You can see the texture is embossed, and this is exactly what I was going for. This is exactly what I wanted. Now this looks like an embroidered piece, like it's been embroidered on, and that's what I wanted with this whole technique. So, oh, that's a little bit of bisque pieces falling off, but here you have the textured piece. I'm going to turn it into a platter. Just keep it on this, bring in my needle tool and just go around. Again, if you want, you can leave a little bit of border around the sides or just go in. I think I'll just go in. Okay. Okay, perfect. Now it's going to take a damp sponge and okay, now I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just taking care of the edges, smoothing everything out. This is what this looks like. I am going to now make it into a little platter. I'm going to bring in a GR pottery form and drape this over it and make it into a nice flat dish kind of form. I'm just seeing which would work better. I think I'm going to go with this one. This is a 9.5-inch diameter. Okay. And I've added a thin piece of foam here just because I don't like that transition edge here. I like it to be soft. So I added a little bit of thin foam. I'm going to try and place this in the center. And for this, I'm going to again get down to the table level and see if it is centered and spend some time making sure it's nice and centered. Okay, I think that looks good. I'm going to just release the clay a little bit from the board. I should have done this before I placed my GR pottery form on top, but it's okay. Just lifting the sides so that when I flip, it's easy to just, make it work. Place another board here, try and center it, and then flip. Yes, there are my finger marks in the back. Now, if you want to, you can get rid of them. I don't mind them. I like them there. It shows that somebody made this. First thing I'll do is probably move it onto a banding wheel. Okay, so it's easy to just turn it around. And then I'm going to first start, just pressing the little bit of border here, edge here to the board. And also at the same time, I'm doing this upward motion with my fingers. And actually has different is not very floppy. It's, I think, at the right consistency where I can do this. I'm not pressing too hard because I don't want to destroy the texture in the front. At the same time, I wanted to confirm to the GR pottery firm. So I'm spending a couple of minutes here, just going around, making sure everything is nicely pressed. Okay, can do that. And then just holding on to this. And during all of this, my motion is upward like this. I'm not pressing down, I'm pressing up. Why? Because I don't want the clay to stretch from the turn, the edge here, from here, because then it can crack. So once you're happy with the way it looks like it is kind of sticking and staying there, just take a damp sponge and go over the edges again, smoothing out any sharp edges, just cleaning them up quickly right here. You know, this is the best stage to do the cleanup work before it's fired. Now I let it sit on top of this for a couple of, for a few minutes, maybe 15-20 minutes, because my clay has stiffened quite a bit, to be honest. So I may not need more than 15 minutes. So I'll just leave it on here for 15 minutes and then come back and flip it over. And I'm not cleaning up the base. I like my finger impressions there. That's the look it has. It's okay. All right. So we'll come back and I'll show you what this looks like once I flipped it over, once it's set up a little bit. All right, our pot has had some time to set up. I'm going to bring in another workboard, place it on top of this and flip. I didn't leave it out for too long, maybe 15-20 minutes, because I had to get through this. Okay, and then just release this and there you go. So that's your pot with the embossed lace pattern, and here's the one with debossed lace pattern. Yeah, now that they are next to each other, I hope you finally get what I mean. Right? So that's how I like to use my laces. I mean, I like to use them both ways, but this is another way where you can get a nice texture. Now, before I let this dry, I'm going to just clean off the edges a little bit. Take care of the edges, smoothen them out nicely. Make sure, especially at these edges, I've compressed everything. And then once it's all done, it's going to go under a sheet of plastic, and I will place, because I haven't added the footring, I'm going to place some kind of weights on top and then let it dry very slowly under a plastic. Keep checking on the plastic from time to time, but let it dry slowly. And I don't think this is ready. This will be ready for bisque firing for another 7 to 10 days, because like I said, I like to fire really slowly, and that helps with keeping it nice and flat and not warp. So that was the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I really love the look of this embroidered ceramic pot. I think there's something really beautiful, really fascinating about this. Whenever I'm back home, I'm always looking for fabric which has some kind of embroidery on it. And the thing is that in India, you have a lot of these, different regions and different parts will have different motifs, different styles of embroidery, and there's so much that you can actually get and use in clay. Again, the only thing you have to remember is that the embroidery or the thread or the weave is thick enough that you can capture the depression in a clay slab to make your texture matte, and then use that to actually texture your final pot. So it has to be slightly thick to get a nice deep impression. If it's not as thick, you'll get a very light texture. That's beautiful too, but most of us texture junkies enjoy a nice deep texture, so it's good to find something which is slightly thicker in terms of the texture, in terms of the weave. So that's all I have for you this week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, subscribe, share, do all the YouTube-y things, because that really helps the channel and really helps me continue doing what I'm doing. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.